Good morning everybody. So yesterday in maths we were looking at fractions, percentages and decimals, and today we're going to be looking at how to calculate percentages of whole amounts of money or weight or whatever the measure might be. So the important thing to remember here when you're working out a percentage of a whole amount is to change the percentage into a fraction to make it a bit easier for yourself. If we look at this first example, we have to find 50% of 6,120. Now in your tables, you have learned that 50% is equivalent to a half. So 50% is the same thing as a half. And you know that if you want to find half of something, you divide it by 2. So to find 50% of 6,120, I have to divide it by 2. And that gave me my answer of 3,060. The next question, we're finding 25% of 6,120, and again you know from your tables that 25% is equal to a quarter. So 50% is the same as a half, 25% is the same as a quarter, and if you're going to find a quarter of something, you divide it by 4. So to find 25% of something, I divide that by 4. And when I did that, I got the answer, which was 1,530. The last question in this set of examples, this time we're going to find 10% of the amount. And again, if you remember from your tables that 10% is equivalent to 1/10. To find 1/10 of something, you split it up into 10 parts, or you divide it by 10, in other words. So again, to find that one, I'm going to divide it by 10. And this time I'm not going to write a dividing sum like I did for these two, because from our maths work earlier in the year, we know that to divide by 10, you simply move the numbers down one house. So my 2 goes into the ones, my 1 follows it by dropping into the tens, and my 6 goes from the thousands into the hundreds. That 0 then drops off the end, and I have 612. So to find 1/10 of something, you divide it by 10. Here are some more common percentages which you will need to work with to find parts of a whole amount. 25%, again, you'll remember this from your tables, is the same as 1/4. 75% is the same as 3/4. 10%, like we said in the last example, is the same as 1/10. And just as another example, any multiple of 10, we'll do this one as an example, like 70% is 7/10. We'll come on to that one in a little minute, and I'll explain how you do that one. But let's start off with 25% of 8,580. Now we know, as we said, that 25% is the same as a quarter, and if you want to find a quarter of something, you've got to divide it by 4. So 8,580 divided by 4 will get you 25% of the number. And my answer there was 2,145. 75% of 8,580. Now our rule for finding the fraction of a whole amount is divide by the bottom, multiply by the top. Divide by the bottom, multiply by the top. Hopefully you remember that from before Christmas when we did fractions. We know that 75% is equivalent or equal to 3/4. So we're going to find 1/4 of 8,580 and then multiply that by 3. We're going to divide by the bottom and multiply by the top. Now I've just found 1/4 of 8,580 over here. Okay, so I've done the bottom part. I've divided by the bottom. Now I need to multiply by the top in order to find out what 3/4 of it is. And that is 6,435. As we said before, to find 1/10 of something, you divide it by 10. So 1/10 of 8,580 would be 858. To find a multiple of 10, like 70% here, or this would work for 20, 30, 40, 80, whatever multiple of 10 you're finding, you have to first of all divide by the bottom and then multiply by the top. So because we know 70% is equal to 7/10, we're going to divide the number by 10 and then multiply it by 7. Now as we just said, 8,580 divided by 10 is 858. So now we have to do the second part, which is multiply by the top. So divide by the bottom, multiply by the top, and that will get us our answer. And my answer this time was 6006. Now that goes for any multiple of 10. So if we were to find, if we were trying to find, for example, 40% of something, 40% is 4/10. So we would divide by the bottom and multiply by the top. If we were finding 90% of something, 90% is 9/10. So we would divide by the bottom, multiply by the top. So when it's a multiple of 10, always remember that you're dividing by 10. First of all, to find 1/10 or 10%, and then multiplying it by whatever you need to get to your multiple of 10. In this case, we've divided by 10 and then multiplied by 7, because 70% is 7/10. This time we're finding 15% of a whole amount. That's a little bit trickier because we can't divide a whole amount by one number to give 15%. So let's think about how we might do that. 15% is a fraction, is 15 over 100, because as we know, percent means out of 100. If we simplify that, you can see that they're both multiples of 5. So if we divide them both by 5, we get 3/20. Now our sum, or the thing that we always do to find the fraction of a whole amount, is divide by the bottom and multiply by the top. So if I'm going to divide 5,460 by 20, I can do it two ways. I could use this method where I balance my zeros, because this number ends in a 0. It only works if both numbers end in a 0. And divide it by 2, which would give me 273. Or to divide a number by 20, what you could do is divide it by 10 first of all. So 5,460 divided by 10, which gives us 546, and then divide that by 2. Okay, just like we've done up here, which gives us 273. So this way is sort of a shortcut, which I can only use because both numbers in my sum are multiples of 10. Okay, so you've got to find 1/20 of your number. You've got to divide it by 20. You can do it either of those two ways. I'm trying to find 3/20 here, so once I have my number, which is 273, I'm going to multiply that by 3 to give me my final answer, and that was 819. One more way to find 15% of something would be to remember that whenever we're talking about percent, once again, just to remind you, so percent, it's Latin, okay, so per, out of, and cent, 100. So when we're talking about percents, we're always thinking about an amount out of 100. So what we're essentially doing is we're dividing 5,460 into hundredths. So using your place value knowledge, you could divide that by 100, which would give you 54.6, and you're multiplying that by 15. Now that's quite a difficult sum, particularly because you've got a decimal point involved there as well. But if you're confident enough, you could definitely tackle it this way. So I'm going to talk you through what I'm doing here, always starting with the ones. Okay, so I'm going to start off by multiplying everything by 5. So 5 times 6 is 30, not forgetting my decimal point. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 3 is 23, and 5 times 5 is 25, plus 2 is 27. Second line of a long multiplication, I start with my magic 0. Magic because it just appears out of nowhere, don't need to do anything to get it. I've got my decimal point still, and then I'm multiplying by my tens, so I've got 1. So 1 times 6 is 6, 1 times 4 is 4, 1 times 5 is 5. And when we add that all together, we get 819, which you'll remember was the answer we got in the first place as well. So if you're very confident with your place value and you're very careful with your multiplication, you could do it this way as well. It's another way of doing it. You could also use that method to find 35%, 5,640. Okay, so again, just be very careful when you're doing your working out for that one. Don't forget your decimal points. And don't forget your magic 0 as well. 3 6s, 18. 3 4s are 12, add 1 is 13, and 3 5s are 15, plus 1 is 16. And then you add them together. And there's your answer for that one. But that's not the most straightforward or safe method to do it. You've got to always be very accurate when you're doing it that way. So I would tend to do it the other way, which I'll remind you of now. So I'm finding 35% of 5,460. I'm going to start off by finding 30%. And I know that 30% is equivalent to 3/10. So I divide by the bottom. So 5,460 divided by 10 gives me 546. And then I multiply by the top. So I'm multiplying that by 3 to give me 30%. And when I did that, I got 1,638. Now what I've got to do is find this 5% so that I can add it on. To find 5% of something, I divide it by 20. So 5,460 divided by 20. Again, I can balance my zeros because these are both multiples of 10. So 5 divided by 2 is 2, remainder 1. 14 divided by 2 is 7. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. The other way of doing that would be to divide it by 10, which is 546, and then just divide that by 2. It's essentially the same thing, but it's just the way you think through it. Okay, whatever way you find easiest to think through it logically in your head is the way you should do it. So to get my final answer, I take my 30% and my 10% and I add them together, which gets me my final answer. And you can see that's the answer that we got whenever we divided by 100 and multiplied by 35 using long multiplication. So again, any of these methods will get you the correct answer, but it's whichever one that you find simplest and easiest to work with, that's the one that you should use. Okay? So one of the most important pieces of knowledge that you'll need for this, that you'll need to recall from your previous learning in P6 for this, is your percentage and fraction equivalent. So let's just go through the ones that you're going to mostly need first of all. 10% is equal to 1/10, and any multiple of 10 after that is equal to 2/10 or 3/10 or 4/10, depending on what it is. So for example, 70% is equal to 7/10. 20% is equal to 2/10 or 1/5, which is easier. You can just divide a number by 5 to find 20%. 25% is a quarter. 50% is a half. And 75% is 3/4. If you want to find 5% of something, that's 1/20. Okay, so you can divide by 10, then divide by 2, or if the number ends in 0, if it's a multiple of 10, you can divide it by 20 using the balancing method by taking a 0 off each number, but only if it's a multiple of 10, so be careful with that one. And whenever you're finding a fraction of a whole amount, remember the rule. Okay, we divide by the bottom number and multiply by the top number. So divide by the bottom, multiply by the top. Change your percentage to a fraction and then work out that fraction of the whole amount. Okay, there'll be another short video following this one for you to look at, which will go through some examples of how you might solve the different types of problems. But this is your main learning video, so whenever you're doing your work and you can't quite remember the method, refer back to this one to help you to work through it.